Good evening. The second Trump era is dawning, and with the incoming administration comes an intense flurry of international attention. In the last 48 hours, the US president-elect invited the Chinese leader Xi Jinping to his inauguration, was named Person of the Year by Time magazine, and meanwhile his ally and recent appointee Elon Musk has become the first person ever to amass a personal fortune valued at an estimated $400 billion. And beneath the inevitable spectacle of Trump mania, there are serious achievements, opportunities and future concerns that will impact the entire planet. Well, tonight I'm joined by our very own Anita Sharma to help us siphon the reason from the rhetoric. But first, Nick Harper reports from Washington.
Well, Guy, this is an audacious invitation from the president-elect Donald Trump. It's a bit like trying to invite someone to your party, even though you're pretty sure that they're not going to attend, but you decide to put out that invitation anyway, just in case. Now we're told, according to media reports here in the US, that the invitation was made last month, shortly after Donald Trump won the election, which took place on November the 5th. And the thinking is there could be some other invites out there for world leaders, including Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who could be attending the inauguration next month. The transition team from Donald Trump say world leaders are lining up to meet President Trump because they know he will soon return to power and restore peace through American strength around the world. Now, it is usual for ambassadors or diplomats to attend presidential inaugurations here in the US. It would be unprecedented, though, for a world leader to attend. According to records that go back as far as 1874, no world leader has ever attended a US presidential inauguration. And it is quite incredible when you bear in mind the rocky relationship between the US and China, and those billions of dollars worth of tariffs which President Trump imposed on China during his first presidency, tariffs that have not been rolled back by President Biden. And President-elect Donald Trump is threatening extra tariffs on China in line of about 10%, potentially up to as much as 60%. He's also hoping to bring in China hawks to his top team, including Senator Marco Rubio, who he wants to be the Secretary of State. But asked in an interview on Friday, Donald Trump said that he gets along very well with Xi Jinping and that they had communications, he says, as recently as this week. This invitation suggests he wants to maintain that type of communication with the Chinese leader. Despite the difficulties in their relationship, it's not clear yet if President Xi has accepted the invitation. Nick Harper for AnewZ in Washington, D.C.
Well, with Donald Trump courting his Chinese counterpart while simultaneously threatening fresh tariffs, how will these mixed messages be received by Beijing? AnewZ's Laura Westbrook reports now with the latest on the Chinese reaction.
Well, Guy, Donald Trump invited Chinese President Xi Jinping in early November, shortly after winning the US presidential election, according to reports. And he said in an interview last week that he had been in communication with Xi Jinping recently, but he declined to say what they had discussed. No Chinese leader has ever attended a US presidential inauguration. Indeed, no foreign leaders have attended one in more than a century. But it is common for foreign dignitaries and diplomats to attend, and this is something that Beijing has also adopted. For instance, then Chinese ambassador to the US, Zhou Wenzhong, he attended Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009 as the Chinese government's representative. Now, the last in-person meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump occurred in June 2019 on the sidelines of the Group of 20 summit in Osaka, Japan. And this all comes as the US and China brace for a renewed standoff after Trump campaigned on a promise to implement 60% tariffs for all goods imported from China. And last month, he vowed to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods unless Beijing does more to stop the flow of illegal drugs, particularly fentanyl. And according to reports, the US president-elect does put a lot on these leader-to-leader relationships to help him to make deals and to advance his agenda. And so this invitation could be seen as an olive branch from Trump. However, analysts here say it would be very unlikely that Xi Jinping accepts, with very little upside for him. And separately on Wednesday, in written remarks to the US-China Business Council, Xi Jinping said that Beijing is prepared to stay in communication with the US, and he also called for market openness from both countries, and that's in the face of those Trump tariff threats. Laura Westbrook for AnewZ in Hong Kong.
Now let's explore this a bit more with our Washington analyst, Oubai Shahbandar. Oubai, good to see you. What's the reaction been then in DC to this extraordinary offer by President-elect Trump?
Well, it certainly is unprecedented. We've never seen an incoming American president invite the Chinese leader to come to his inauguration. And of course, President Trump and Xi Jinping have a love-hate relationship. In the past, President Trump has said that he respects Xi Jinping and he sees China as a competitor, but not necessarily an adversary. And of course, China being one of America's most important trading partners on a number of goods. And this, of course, the offer by President-elect Trump comes shortly after the president announced that he was going to impose a limited amount of tariffs on Chinese goods. And that was because of conversations that have been taking place between Washington and China on the issue of fentanyl. The American government is not happy that the Chinese government is not doing enough to crack down on the production of this deadly drug that is then shipped to Latin America, that then drug cartels mix in with drugs, and they smuggle those drugs into the United States. There is a fentanyl opioid crisis in the US, and President Trump has said in a social media post that he pins the blame on China for not doing enough to take American concerns seriously. And in a typical fashion that has sort of encapsulated President Trump's America First foreign policy paradigm, President Trump announced that he was going to put real pressure on the Chinese on tariffs that will impact Chinese exports to the US until China agrees to American demands. So again, President Trump's invitation is part of this carrot and stick approach with the Chinese leader that is reflective of President Trump's approach to foreign policy on a leadership to leadership level. And of course, Beijing will be one of America's most pressing foreign policy priorities for the incoming Trump administration.
Oubai, Anita here. I like that, carrot and stick, right, Guy? Because it really is quite interesting to watch this from this vantage point, what's transpiring. It's almost deja vu with the carrot and the stick, as you mentioned. You bring into play here the Canadian Prime Minister as well. As you know, he was at Mar-a-Lago last week. Of course, they talked about the tariffs that Trump and his administration are threatening to impose on Mexico, on Canada, as well as China. Going back to Xi Jinping, Oubai, I wonder, is it an olive branch that he's extending to Xi Jinping, or is it actually an insult? Because like you said, it's unprecedented that a world leader would show up.
Certainly for the Chinese, leader to show up. Look, let's face it. Xi Jinping is probably not going to take up President Trump's offer. But I think this is a message from President Trump. He's telling Xi Jinping, look, let's work together. If we're going to compete, I'm going to put tariffs. We have certain demands, and certainly we understand that you have certain demands. So this is part of the negotiating style by President Trump that we've seen him use successfully in the business world, that he's now taking on the geopolitical stage. China needs America, and America needs China. The two are just connected on an umbilical cord of trade. But the issue of Taiwan to certainly be a massive thorny foreign policy issue for President Trump. There are many here in the U.S. and foreign policy establishment that believe that Xi Jinping likes to reunify Taiwan with China. And of course, Taiwan receives a significant amount of military hardware from the U.S., and the U.S. has a number of aircraft carriers in the Pacific and military bases in the Pacific as well. So if China does decide to invade Taiwan, the U.S. military might get directly sucked into that conflict. But when it comes to issues like fentanyl, the Trump administration is here that this is a national security issue. So many Americans are dying. Look, fentanyl, when you mix it in with other drugs, is instant death and is extremely addictive. And these Latin American cartels that have been mixing in this fentanyl that they ship in from manufacturers in China have essentially been flooding across the border into the U.S. Their deadly goods that are laced with fentanyl, and to such a degree that thousands of deaths are caused by these Latin American drug cartels with their fentanyl-laced, goods. And Trump has made it clear to Beijing that they view this as part of a purposeful Chinese effort to allow the fentanyl to be produced in China, but only distributed to Latin America. Xi Jinping himself is a tough negotiator, and I think President Trump understands and respects that.
Oubai, as is often the case, and as was certainly the case during the first presidency, President-elect Donald Trump is, again, never out of the news, seemingly. We've seen more headlines over the last 48 hours. Trump named Person of the Year by Time magazine. Also, interestingly, the appointment of Carrie Lake as an attempt to really take someone with great journalistic skills and background and put her also at the heart of government.
Yeah, that's right. This is the second time that President Trump has been named Person of the Year by Time magazine. And to celebrate the occasion, we saw President Trump giving a speech at the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange today, where he said he was honored by Time magazine choosing him amongst many others that were nominated. Of course, President Trump now joins a very prestigious list of former presidents that have been named Time magazine's Person of the Year on multiple occasions. And, this is also really caps a political comeback for President Trump. He was facing a slew of legal problems in New York. The Department of Justice was trying to go after him. And here he not only wins the election in decisive fashion, he is the first Republican presidential candidate to win the popular vote in 20 years. Now, Carrie Lake is a long-time supporter of President Trump. She unsuccessfully ran for the U.S. Senate seat in Arizona, a state that President Trump carried by wide margin, but she is considered a staunch loyalist of the president. Of course, she started off her career in media in Arizona, and she's now been appointed by President Trump to head Voice of America, which is really the public broadcaster of the U.S. and meant to project American soft power across the world. Voice of America operates across a number of languages from almost every continent. And so it is viewed by the U.S. government as critical to get the American message, dozens of languages across the world. So a very interesting turn of events for Carrie Lake, who has run for public office unsuccessfully a number of times. But, President Trump likes to reward those that stick by him through thick and thin.
Oubai, as always, great pleasure to talk to you. Oubai Shahbandar there for us in Washington. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, one of the key members of President-elect Donald Trump's team and key allies and advisors is, of course, the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. New information, new analysis from Bloomberg has put his wealth now at almost $400 billion US dollars. Well, to discuss this topic is Stephen Dickens joining us now. Stephen is the founder and CEO of Hyperframe Research in New York. Stephen, great to speak to you. Take us through how this has happened. And many people, of course, will know that Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. They'll be familiar with his brands. But it's probably worth recapping on how this extraordinary success has actually happened.
Well, Guy, thank you for having me on the show. You need to go back to the mid-90s. Elon's been a serial entrepreneur. There was the Zip2 online city guide that he sold to Compaq. He founded that with his brother. sold that for over 300 million, personally got 22 million from that sale. Then you wind forward, this is where we start to see X.com later merging, becoming PayPal. This is where he establishes connections with people like Peter Thiel and David Sachs. David Sachs has recently been announced with a role in the Trump administration overseeing AI and crypto. So that's where some of these links go back. Obviously, PayPal then sold to eBay. That's where Elon sort of established his war chest, almost 200 million there. And that's where we then see the foundations for things like Tesla, SpaceX, the Boring Company, Neuralink, all of the sort of companies that Elon has founded that then have put him on the trajectory to where he is today with this stellar number of 400 billion.
Stephen, Anita here. Thank you so much for that profile of Elon Musk. Really curious moving forward. As Guy mentioned, he's now the $400 billion man. Folks said he was crazy to buy Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, for what, $44 billion US. Chump change, it seems, right, for a man who's now worth $400 billion. It was also quite pivotal and instrumental, was it not, for the Trump campaign to come to power? And we all know what a huge presence Musk will have alongside Donald Trump.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at X, obviously known previously as Twitter, I think that's a side project for something he's passionate around is free speech. He's been very vocal on that topic. I think it gives him a platform. He's very keen to communicate directly. There's not a PR team for Tesla, for instance. A lot of the tech companies that I operate with, analyst relations and press relations teams, Elon's companies don't. What they decide to do is communicate directly. Elon sees X as his platform to communicate directly. We all know his views on the mainstream media. We won't go there, but he feels that it's a platform that gives him the ability to communicate directly, both on the interests of his companies. He's had issues with that in the past. The SEC have fined him for some of the things he said online, but he feels it's a risk worth taking to grow his interests and to grow those of his companies.
Steve, yeah, incredible journey and one that we're going to see more of, I think, in politics moving forward. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Stephen Dickens, there, founder and CEO of Hyperframe Research in New York. Well, that is all we have time for on NewsHour this evening. Thank you very much for watching. Please do stay tuned to AnewZ for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here on the team, we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.